So we are at part 60 at our Wild Harvest Edibles presentation series called Thou Preparest a Table Before Me. And just a reminder that as we begin, that as you navigate any health challenge, it's always recommended that you partner with a medical practitioner that shares your philosophy of the care of the human body, disease and in health. And the information here is educational in nature. It's meant to help improve your wellness toolbox, aid in returning to health if sick, and if you're already in good health, just helping that to be maintained. Not construed as medical advice, but just tools that others have used successfully. Just always investigate thoroughly any protocol, treatment, or procedure for yourself, not just blindly accepting something without doing your own research. Thomas Edison said that the doctor of the future will give no medicine. I wonder which future that is, but will instruct his patients in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. Very forward-thinking thoughts there for our day and age and his day and age. Back in 1885, it was said that there are many ways of practicing the healing art, but there's only one way that heaven approves. God's remedies are the simple agencies of nature that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties, pure air and water, cleanliness and a proper diet, purity of life, and a firm trust in God are remedies for which the want of thousands are dying. Yet these remedies are going out of date because their skillful use requires work that people do not appreciate. Fresh air, exercise, pure water, and clean, sweet premises are within the reach of all, with but little expense. But drugs are expensive both in the outlay of means and the effect produced upon the system. And, you know, it's becoming more and more apparent that 3 John 1 verse 2 is just super critical. We need to make sure that our souls, our hearts are in the proper place, because if they aren't, the rest of our being can't prosper. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. And also Romans 12, 1 and 2, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. One of the most beautiful things of spring are lilacs. When I grew up, we had a hedge that was alternating purple and white lilac, and it would come into bloom, and it was just very fragrant. The white variety tends to not sour, but just goes brown quickly with rain, and the purple variety stays nice much longer. Our lilacs here are just coming out. We have one bush. The neighbors have a bush, and it's fun to have them come out and just smell the fragrance. It can grow to 20 feet tall and 15 feet wide. Our hedge was so large at home that we could almost go from tree to tree within it as small kids playing Swift Arrow. But it's abundantly fragrant, and the flowers are edible of the lilac. So the flowers and the fruit, so the purple or white flowers, multiple flower cones. You can kind of see one here. We'll see another picture that gives it, shows its more conical shape along with individual blossoms that make it up. And they come in the clusters or clumps of their blossoms, just full of fragrance. They can be up to 7 inches long, and the flowers can be up to 1/3 of an inch in across. The fruit is held upright. They're oval in shape, and they usually dry out and are not consumed as the fruit, but they eventually have a winged seed inside that's released as they get drier. And so that's how it gets. So it can transplant, or it can be propagated through the seeds, but most frequently it's done through cuttings or actually through root. The underground roots send up a new stem, kind of like an aspen grove. So lilac spools tend to spread that way too. So the leaf is kind of a green to bluish leaf. It can be 2 to 4 inches long, inch to 2.5 inches wide at the stem, and then tapering up to a point. Sometimes they're even heart-shaped. You can see that a little bit here with a white one, the white variety that I've shown here. And we can see in a little bit later picture more clearly. But the flowers are the part of the lilac that's edible. It's kind of fun to have edible flowers. You can sprinkle them through salads. You can put them in various places that are not only decorative, but add nutrients and flavor to whatever dish you're using. So harvesting them, you want to harvest the flowers mid to late spring, harvest them when the flowers are at their peak. So you can tell, you can see budded and completely open flowers in this particular picture. You can use it as a salad garnish, use it as a lilac flower tea, and you can make a syrup out of the flowers themselves. So lilac syrup, take 1 cup of the lilac flowers, which you can see the conical shape of a cluster there in the person's hand there in the picture. 1 cup of water and 1 cup of sugar or honey if you prefer. Remove the stems from the flowers. It's important to have the stems absent because some lilac varieties have the bark that has some toxins associated and can be poisonous. So make sure it's just flowers. Bring the water and sweetener to a boil, and then add the flowers and simmer it for 10 minutes. And then remove it from the heat and cover it and let it just sit there and soak in that water for 6 to 8 hours. So it's going to cool down in that, and as it does that, it's going to continue the extraction process of the aromatic qualities and the nutrient qualities from the lilac flowers. Then you can strain it and store it in the refrigerator up to 2 weeks and use it as you like to put over top of various things. Some medicinal properties. So here you can see the leaf is kind of heart-shaped in this particular picture. Sometimes they're wider and even more heart-shaped than that. But lilac, particularly the blossoms, contain lutein, which is a phytonutrient that helps prevent macular degeneration and helps prevent cataracts from developing. You can make it a tea from the leaves and seeds. So we talked about the seeds earlier as being in their pods and then releasing the 3-winged seeds or 4-winged seeds. It's an anti-periodic. So it's something like malaria is a periodic because you can get malaria and then unless you have it completely removed from the system, when your immune system is reduced for whatever reason, it'll crop up again so that it periodically re-manifests itself in the system until it's, unless it's completely eradicated. It also has febrifuge qualities, fever reducing, which is helpful in something like malaria because a fever is one of the primary qualities that is a signature of malaria. So the flower has astringent and aromatic qualities. It stimulates circulation and healing. The healing is promoted by the stimulation that's being circulated. The astringency helps to draw tissues together, so it helps in aiding healing, both in the gut as well as the surface. The tea of the raw flowers, you can make a tea of the raw flowers or just eat them raw, straight off the bush, or in a salad or in another flower garnish of some sort. And then you can also infuse honey with the flowers. So there is the syrup, but you can also just have the honey and you can maybe warm it slightly or just put it into it and let it brew, so to speak, and have it draw the constituents out of it and give a slight flavor to the honey. So Wozniak et al. In 2018 in Frontiers in Pharmacology noted that one of the compounds, new oleoprin, appeared to be the most active compound in the inhibition of cytokine production. So cytokine, we've heard about the cytokine storm in the late plague that we've had here. So it inhibits cytokine production by essentially attenuating, that means reducing the ability to function of a particular enzyme, the kinase, the MAP kinase pathway. So it basically helps to reduce inflammation and inflammatory responses. And that's the role of cytokines. So one of the components is anti-inflammatory in that regard. Since we are in close proximity to the ocean, I thought I would also throw in, talk about and discuss some algae that are edible. This is rockweed, Fucus dysticus, and actually it's a type of rack. Sometimes it's called popping rack, but there are many different types of rack across the world. Bladder rack, spiral, tooth rack, and they're all edible. Typically they're found in sheltered areas of both the east and the west coast. It's probably more prolific on the east coast. There isn't bull kelp on the east coast. That's a Pacific coast phenomena. So it's a different type of algae, but there's lots of it. In fact, the harvesting rules are different on the east coast. They actually harvested, I think, quite extensively for composting and for garden usage in England. So that's the Atlantic rack. they will use it in their gardening applications there. The West Coast, there are some different collection procedures that need to be adhered to when utilizing it. So it can live up to 5 years. So a particular plant can have a fairly long duration of lifespan, as long as that is anchored to the rock. It's not going to be dashed against the rocks and wound up on the beach and end up crisping up and drying up and being eradicated and die. It's typically intertidal. So we see a picture on the bottom there, starting from the trees and going down to below the tidal zone. See that some of the animals along the way and the different algae that are highlighted. So anywhere between low and high tide, up to 10 feet below the tide line, is where rockweed flourishes. There are many herbivores, the urchin in particular, that will graze on various algae, and rockweed is one of those different types of algae that it will graze on. So the blade is analogous to the frond on a fern, the leaf on the lamb plant. We call it a blade and an algae, and it has a pronounced central midrib. So kind of down toward the lower end of the stem on the upper picture, and actually it's a lighter colored area on the lower picture. That's the midrib. It branches by two, so it comes up from a single stalk, and then it diverges into two, and it diverges into two, and it continues to diverge into two, hence its species name being Dysticus, which means two sticks. And at the very top, there are kind of a bladder structure that has two tips at the tip. And that happens to be the structure that produces the spores that then go on to propagate the next generation. But it's a smooth, shiny olive green to brown. If you're classifying algae, it's definitely in the brown algae family, even though it has kind of a greenish tinge to it. That's kind of one of the trickster components of algae keying is the greens actually look very, very green. In fact, there's an epiphytic. An epiphyte is a plant that grows on another plant. In the central picture at the top there, there's some ulva, which is sea lettuce, right there, and it's very green, kind of like the color of grass. If it's grass green, it's green. If it's any other kind of shade of green, it's likely going to be a brown. So it may be stunted or lack the bladders in areas where the surf is higher. So there's more wave action. It's going to be less tall. So the upper picture there is quite long. If it's in a high surf area, it's going to be much more compact and lower to the rock surface. That way it's much more kind of resilient to the pounding wave action. So the portion that is between the top, which is referred to as the blade, and the bottom is referred to as the holdfast. It can be very flexible and short, should be short, attached by a disc like holdfast. The holdfast is the anchor point at the bottom. So it's a disc-like anchor. Other types of algae have very knobby, kind of fist-like projections that adhere it to the rock. So it does grow on rocky surfaces or other hard objects, kind of like docks or concrete area. It doesn't grow well on shifting things like sand. On occasion, I've seen it growing on backs of crabs, large crabs and things like that. But generally speaking, it finds its habitation on solid things. It'll also grow on barnacles, but occasionally barnacles get eaten and then fall apart or get dashed by rocks. And the upper picture has a little white, which is a part of a barnacle attached there. So when harvesting the algae, it's important to remember a few things. The edible portions are the young, tender blades, are the part that are eaten. And you can see a pile of it here, and this has been dried. You want to harvest fresh algae. You can eat it if it's like the first, like right on that tide that's come in. But if it's been on the beach for over a day, you probably don't want to consume it because it tends to start to decay. You want to leave about 2 inches so it can grow back, because it's kind of like a lawn in that regard. It will grow back. You can use it in soups and stews as a thickener. It has some components in it called alginins, carrageenan, which will tend to thicken soups and kind of gel a little bit. So it can be dried and powdered, and it can be used all by itself. It's kind of bland in that regard. It's typically better if it's used in some other kind of a food application. So you can make a soup powder that can be then used in soup. So to the right there is a powder, and there's a variety of different things added to that. So 1 cup of dried rockweed, and a teaspoon of mushroom powder, 1 teaspoon each of ginger, chili, and powdered garlic, and then grind the rockweed to a powder, and then combine all those elements together. So the grinding of the rockweed to a powder, you could use a blender, you could use a mortar and pestle, different ways to grind it up into a very fine powder. And then just keep that aside as kind of a soup stock additive, and add 1 to 2 tablespoons to any soup or stew that you're making. So it's kind of a flavoring. And it could be something akin to something like chicken style seasoning as a replacement for that. Many times seaweeds have components in them, a lot of minerals and things like that, that have some flavor components to them, like the mushroom powder, I think, too, that have kind of that umami flavor that is known for, MSG is known for, which we know is an excitotoxin from the research of Dr. Russell Blaylock as a neurotoxin, something that some people have severe sensitivities to. And others don't, but it's something that should be steered away from if possible. So some medicinal uses. I love this picture in the upper right. It's taken from a state park ad. That's a blood star that is right there, just a very beautiful contrast. Sometimes we can see that on the beach, but it's a great source of iodine. And actually, it's a good treatment for iodine deficiency. It was used that way originally for doing that. Use it with some caution in that regard, because it can be fairly potent accumulator, but it has powerful antioxidant and inflammatory properties associated with it. Using it topically can help promote collagen growth. So collagen is underlying protein in our skin that gives us elasticity and helps to keep it in good shape, helping to eliminate wrinkles and the signs of aging. When that collagen starts to break down, you start to have those other manifestations of its breakdown, wrinkles, for example, beginning to be more prominent. So there is kind of a gel-like substance in the upper tips, and it has kind of a slimy feel to it. Most seaweed does, and that is a component that can be utilized as a topical use. It can be added to baths as a moisture additive for the skin, and it's actually been shown to have possible inhibition of tumor growth and blood clotting. So that can be helpful in the appropriate applications. And it also helps control blood sugar levels. It's often used as a component in weight loss formulas. So that is another use of that. So there are a number of different things we've looked at over the course of the various times together that have had different helpful natures to diabetic situations. The next algae that we'll look at, seaweed, is Neurocystis Luciana. It's a very fast growing seaweed. It can grow up to a foot per day, which is actually very fast. Kudzu vine is right along in the same class with that. And both kudzu and bull kelp are edible. An annual seaweed, although it can last for multiple seasons, at least one full season and into the next. I've seen some very giant seaweed that have lots of epiphytes growing on them. It's very evident that they've been growing for more than one season. And it's their spores that they release that allow them to then promote the next generation, or allow the next generation to arise from them. They can be up to 70 feet long, and it's called bull kelp, also known as bull whip kelp, because it looks just like a bull whip. And one long stalk or stipe, and then the blades are at the top. And divers are very familiar with that. We can see in the picture in the bottom and on the top that the current is moving from left to right, and that is used by mariners, recreational boaters as well as divers, to get a quick read on which direction the current is going. In the background of the top picture, the foreground is bull kelp, and the background is another seaweed called Macrocystis, and that is the one that sea otter prefer, and is why they don't come into the inside the Puget Sound region, because there's no Macrocystis that grows inside the sound. It's an open coast algae. So it grows in forests, kelp forests of the Pacific coast of North America. And the bladder at the top, that ball, is a hollow chamber that has gas in it. The primary one is carbon monoxide, and just keeps the interior sterile. And that loses its sterility if it gets broken, and then can cause the death of the plant. But it can be up to 3 liters of volume. So it's not just the bladder, it actually can go down the length of the stipe for some distance. There can be a tube, and it's always a fun thing to cut those ends off. And if you're a brass player, you can blow a horn, like a foghorn. That's kind of fun. So it has long, narrow blades that extend from the top of the air bladder. They can be up to 10 feet long. The blade is another name for the frond. Oops. And can be up to 10 feet long. And these folks are on the back of a trawler here with a very long bull kelp. It looks like it didn't come up intact because there's no holdfast associated with it. But the blades and the stipe and the air bladder at the top all can be eaten. For harvesting it, you want to use it fresh. You can use wash up if it's the day that's washed up. It can be dried and powdered as a food seasoning. It's kind of an ocean-like flavor to it. Make kelp chips, soups, etc. And it actually has more potassium than bananas and about the same protein as chicken. So it's actually a fairly nutritious plant. I've said before that if I was stuck on a desert island, I'd want bull kelp and stinging nettles as my 2 foods, but because they have such a wide variety of applications to them. So one thing you can do is you can make pickles out of them. We did this when I was in college as a part of the class that I was a part of. When we learned about algae, we made kelp pickles. You can make them sweet or dill, whatever your preference is. Use 1 to 2 fresh and firm stipes. Remove the bulb and the blades at the top. Wash it well and slice it into 1/2-inch pieces. You can see them doing that here on a nice wooden cutting board. Rinse it twice and toss in some sea salt, and then slice an onion, crush a clove of garlic, and then rinse the kelp a 3rd time. So a 3-time total wash, and then pack it in sterile jars. You can add onion and garlic, a teaspoon of lemon juice per jar, and then add the brine, which is 2 cups of vinegar, a cup of water, and 2/3 a cup of sugar. So if you're doing dill pickles, you do it a little bit differently. You put in some garlic maybe and a dill sprig, and then boil it 1 minute, and that is the brine, and fill the jars. So this is, if you wanted to make them so they were sealed, you would then put them through a water bath canner to seal them. This particular application is for refrigerator pickles. You want to season them or have them marinate essentially for 48 hours prior to consuming them. So eating seaweed, you may need a permit depending on where you are to legally collect seaweed. Up to 10 pounds per day fresh is a limit that I've seen here in Washington State. You want to make sure you have clean water that you're collecting from. It's actually an addendum to a shellfish permit that you can get the seaweed collection permit. Other places may not have that kind of permitting associated with it. But it can accumulate toxins of the water they inhabit. So we want to just be sure that the area is clean where we're harvesting from. And as we know, water is like air in that it carries contaminants all over the place. So it may be difficult to find a place that you could really guarantee is being free from toxins, especially in today's environment. So medicinal qualities of bull kelp, they're high in vitamins and minerals. And they, interestingly enough, may help with ADD, attention deficit disorder, insomnia, and depression. You can see the top of the bull kelp, the bulb has been cut off in both pictures here. And you can see them using it as a water vessel on the lower picture. So to review this and to look at other presentations similar in nature, you can go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.